Rick and Morty has been on the air for over 12 years, and it still sits on questions it never answered. Which Beth is the clone? Did Rick actually freeze time to keep Morty young? What does evil Morty plan to do with the Omega device now that he has escaped to an unlimited multiverse? And underneath all of that, there is the story of how this show even came to exist. A story that starts with a cease and desist letter from Bill Cosby's lawyers, a deliberately offensive internet short, and two guys at a short film festival in Los Angeles who had absolutely no idea what they were building. Tonight we are going through all of it. The famous stuff, the buried stuff, the things the writers never intended anyone to find, layer by layer, from the surface all the way down. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, we will be here a while, and if you have not subscribed to Rickar, it genuinely does help us keep making these. Let us start at the top of the iceberg, the stuff everybody knows or thinks they know. Because even the most familiar parts of Rick and Morty, once you look at them closely, have something underneath them. Rick and Morty is an adult animated science fiction sitcom that premiered on Cartoon Network's late-night block Adult Swim on December 2, 2013. Created by Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon, the show follows 14-year-old Morty Smith, his parents Jerry and Beth, his sister Summer, and his grandfather Rick Sanchez, who is possibly the most intelligent being in the entire multiverse. Rick moved into the family home, converted their garage into a laboratory, and from that point on has been dragging Morty across the universe in pursuit of increasingly dangerous and increasingly absurd adventures. The premise sounds simple, the execution is anything but. What the show got right from its very first episode was tone. Most animated comedies pick a lane and stay in it. They are either absurdist and silly, or emotionally grounded, or satirical. But Rick and Morty insisted on being all three simultaneously, and then it insisted on being absolutely ruthless about the emotional consequences of its own premise. If you travel through an infinite multiverse, every version of you exists somewhere. Every death is local. Every loss is replaceable. The show looked at that idea, absorbed it fully, and then used it to tell some of the most genuinely devastating stories in television animation. That is the thing people underestimate when they think of Rick and Morty as a comedy. It has always been a tragedy wearing a comedy's clothes. Rick Sanchez himself is one of the most layered protagonists in American animation. On the surface, he is a drunk, a narcissist, a reckless genius who seems to care about nothing and no one. He is spectacularly funny in that role. But the show has spent 9 seasons revealing that every element of that persona, the drinking, the nihilism, the manic energy, is load-bearing armor over something genuinely broken. Rick is a man who lost the people he loved most, who has lived through more grief and more violence than the show has fully shown us, and who constructed a worldview in which nothing matters because caring about things causes unbearable pain. His relationship with Morty is not just convenient, it is the one place where Rick allows himself to actually care, which is exactly why it is also the most dangerous relationship in his life. Morty is his counterbalance. 14 years old, anxious, kind, perpetually out of his depth. But Morty is not simply the naive foil. Across 9 seasons, he has been traumatized repeatedly. He has watched himself be buried in a backyard. He has lived dozens of parallel lives. He has made decisions that caused enormous harm and had to live with them. The show treats Morty's development seriously. He is growing up, just very, very slowly, in the most terrifying possible environment. Beth Smith is Rick's daughter. A horse surgeon, married to the deeply ordinary Jerry, she is brilliant and insecure in equal measure, and the show returns again and again to her need for her father's validation. Sarah Chalke plays her with enormous intelligence, finding the moments where Beth's pride and her longing are indistinguishable from each other. Summer, Morty's older sister, starts the series as a background character and grows into one of the show's most capable and genuinely badass figures. And Jerry, played by Chris Parnell, is the show's most underrated character. Jerry is weak, self-deceiving, and emotionally dependent, and the show both mocks him relentlessly and treats his feelings as real and worthy of genuine empathy. That balance is hard to pull off. The writers find it more often than people give them credit for. The voice cast deserves its own moment here because it is not famous for the obvious reasons. Sarah Chalke, who plays Beth, was previously known for playing Elliot in Scrubs and the second Becky Connor in Roseanne. Spencer Grammer, who plays Summer, is the daughter of Kelsey Grammer, the actor who played Frasier Crane for 2 decades across 2 different shows. Chris Parnell, who plays Jerry, is a longtime Saturday Night Live cast member who has also done voice work on Archer and other animated shows that defined late-night animation for a decade. And of course, until January of 2023, Justin Roiland voiced both Rick and Morty simultaneously, which is genuinely extraordinary when you think about how distinct and fully realized both characters feel. They sound like different people entirely, and they always did. Now let us go one level down. The most famous moments in the show's cultural history, and what actually happened versus what people remember. There is a phrase Rick uses constantly, and it is probably the most famous thing he says. Wubba lubba dub dub. He shouts it. He uses it as a sign-off. He drops it in the middle of sentences. It sounds like pure nonsense, the kind of catchphrase that gets printed on 1,000 t-shirts and mugs and phone cases without ever meaning anything. And for most viewers, that is exactly what it is. Here is the part that gets me, though. The phrase was entirely improvised. Justin Roiland threw it out as a joke during a recording session, a self-conscious parody of the kind of cartoon catchphrase that gets licensed and monetized to death. It was never supposed to mean anything. It was a gag about gags. And then, several episodes into the first season, in the finale episode called Ricksy Business, something changed. Birdperson, Rick's oldest friend, is standing with Morty at a party, and Morty asks what Wubba Lubba Dub Dub actually means. Birdperson tells him, in his language, the phrase means, "I am in great pain, please help me." The writing room added that meaning after Roiland had already established the catchphrase. They took a throwaway improv joke and retroactively gave it a weight that changes every single time you hear it in context. Every time Rick shouts Wubba Lubba Dub Dub with that manic grin, he is, if you choose to read it this way, shouting his own distress in a language nobody around him understands. That is either an accident that became something meaningful through creative reinterpretation, or it is one of the sharpest character details in the series. I think it might be both. The internet was quick to figure this out. If you search the phrase on Google, the search engine returns the translation as an Easter egg, which suggests the production team was in on it long before most viewers were. Pickle Rick is probably the most famous episode in the show's history, and it has become something of a cultural shorthand, used to reference both the best and the worst of what Rick and Morty represents. The episode, which aired in the 3rd season and was written by Jessica Gao, follows Rick's self-transformation into a pickle to avoid a therapy appointment with his family. What follows is an absurd action sequence in which Pickle Rick engineers an escape from a sewer, improvises weapons from rat parts and cockroach shells, and ultimately tears through an entire federal facility while a Russian assassin tries to stop him. It is enormously entertaining. It is also, read carefully, deeply sad. The action plot is the surface. The real episode is the therapy session that frames it. Dr. Wong, the family therapist, voiced with remarkable precision by Susan Sarandon, cuts straight through the joke. She tells Rick that the only connection between his unquestionable intelligence and the sickness destroying his family is that everyone in his family, Rick included, uses intelligence to justify sickness. She tells him that the behavior he calls "I just really like being a pickle" is, in plain terms, a grown man turning himself into a vegetable to avoid his own daughter's pain. She does not flinch, and she does not forgive him, and she does not hate him either. She is just accurate. Writer Jessica Gao has said that she wrote Dr. Wong's speech as a deliberate meta-commentary on Rick's character, and more than that, on the specific subculture of fans who had adopted Rick's nihilism as intellectual armor. The fans who watched the show and saw Rick's contempt for everything as admirable rather than tragic. She wrote a character who says, very clearly, that using intelligence as a reason not to have feelings is not wisdom, it is a coping mechanism dressed up as philosophy. And then she stuck that speech inside the most absurdist episode of the series, so the fans who most needed to hear it would be watching. The episode won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program in 2018. It was the show's first Emmy, The same Jessica Gao, who was one of the female writers hired for Season 3 over considerable online opposition, walked away with the award for the most celebrated episode in the show's history. I find that satisfying in a way I do not feel a need to over-explain. Then there is the Szechuan sauce moment, which became something more complicated than a cultural phenomenon. Let us put it all in order. In the Season 3 premiere, Rick delivers a monologue about his supposed motivation. He says he wants that Mulan McNugget sauce, Morty. That's my series arc. The Szechuan dipping sauce had been a promotional item tied to Disney's 1998 animated film Mulan. It existed briefly, it disappeared, and nobody had thought about it for nearly 20 years. Rick's monologue resurrected it. Nearly 50,000 people signed a petition asking McDonald's to bring the sauce back. McDonald's initially sent 3 jugs of the sauce to fans and 1 to Justin Roiland, a gesture that was well-intentioned and wildly miscalculated in terms of what it would do to demand. On October 7, 2017, McDonald's ran a limited promotion. Reports suggest as few as 20 packets per store were available in some locations. People camped overnight. People crossed state lines. Police were called to multiple locations. There were scenes of genuine disturbance, verbal abuse of employees, fans shouting catchphrases as though that constituted currency. At least one incident where a man refused to leave a counter after being told the sauce was gone. The whole thing was covered by major news outlets and became, for a brief period, the defining image of a fandom that had absorbed Rick's sense of entitlement along with his sense of humor. McDonald's apologized publicly and released 20 million sauce packets on February 26, 2018. That is the resolution. They made enough sauce for 20 million people, and the whole thing became a footnote. But the October chaos told you something about what the show had become by its 3rd season. The cultural reach was enormous, and the portion of the audience that had decided they were Rick, that their love of the show was a sign of superior intelligence, was capable of behaving exactly as badly as that self-image implied. Dan Harmon has talked about this publicly. He did not find it flattering. The Season 3 April Fool's premiere is one of the stranger decisions in the show's broadcast history, and it worked in a way nobody quite anticipated. On April 1, 2017, without any prior announcement, Adult Swim aired the Season 3 premiere, an episode called The Rick Shank Rickdemption, on a loop for 4 straight hours beginning at 8 in the evening Eastern Time. Adult Swim executive Mike Lazo suggested the idea. Justin Roiland, by his own account, thought it was a horrible idea when he first heard it. The remaining 9 episodes of Season 3 did not air until July 30th of the same year, nearly 4 months later. The gap between the surprise premiere and the rest of the season created enormous anticipation and also some genuine frustration, because the episode ended on significant story beats that would not be resolved for months. But the numbers tell the story clearly. The live stream recorded 3 million unique visitors, 43.3 million impressions, and 8.7 million video views across the day. Roiland later admitted, if you used the internet that night, you could not avoid something about Rick and Morty. That is a remarkable statement about a show on a late-night cable block, and it tells you how much the audience had grown between the 2nd and 3rd seasons. What the April Fool's premiere also did was establish something about the show's relationship with its audience. The show, and the network, were willing to treat the audience as participants rather than just viewers. The secrecy, the surprise, the loop, the shared experience of everyone discovering it at once on social media, all of that created a kind of communal viewing event that most streaming-era television has lost. For one night, watching Rick and Morty felt like being at a party everyone was invited to simultaneously. Now we go deeper. The hiring of female writers for Season 3 is a documented fact in the show's history, and the response it generated is one of the less flattering episodes in animation fandom. The first 2 seasons of Rick and Morty had no female writers at all. Dan Harmon has acknowledged this directly and has said that the decision to actively seek women for the Season 3 writers' room was a deliberate correction. The writers hired for that season included Jessica Gao, Jane Becker, Sarah Carbiner, and Erica Rosby, among others. Gao, as already noted, went on to write Pickle Rick. Becker has co-written some of the most emotionally sophisticated episodes in the series. A faction of fans on the internet, concentrated primarily on certain image boards, responded by publishing personal information of the female writers. Death threats and hate mail followed. This is not disputed, and it is not ancient internet history. It happened in 2017, and it was significant enough to be covered by mainstream entertainment journalism at the time. Dan Harmon condemned the harassment publicly. The writers remained on the show. Jessica Gao's episode won an Emmy. The specific ideology behind the harassment is worth naming clearly because it tracks with a broader cultural pattern the show accidentally enabled. There is a subculture of fans who identified with Rick Sanchez not as a flawed and self-destructive character worthy of examination, but as a model of superior intelligence, someone who sees through social convention and treats emotional connection as weakness. These fans used Rick's worldview as self-description, and when the show hired women to write it, that felt, to that subculture, like an invasion of something they had claimed as their own intellectual territory. The harassment was, in this reading, people defending a fantasy of themselves against the very writers who were, at that moment, producing the most critically acclaimed season of the show. The irony is almost too clean. Gao did not just survive the harassment, she won. The intelligence gatekeeper fan subculture, the type of person who watches Rick and Morty and walks away believing it confirms their intellectual superiority, has been a repeated subject of cultural commentary around the show. Dan Harmon has addressed it. The writers have addressed it, and Pickle Rick addressed it more effectively than any think piece could, by putting its argument inside an Emmy-winning comedy episode that the same audience was watching with enormous enthusiasm. I think the writers knew exactly what they were doing. The 70-episode renewal announced on May 10, 2018, remains the single largest episode order in Adult Swim history. Before that announcement, the show had produced 31 episodes across 3 seasons. The new order was for 70 more, which would bring the total to 101 episodes. That number was not accidental. 100 episodes is the traditional threshold for a show to qualify for syndication, which opens up enormous additional revenue streams from cable reruns. Rick and Morty was being positioned not just as a hit show, but as a franchise asset with decades of licensing potential. Forbes reported that the show had generated over $1 billion in revenue since its premiere, with more than 150 global licensees generating hundreds of millions per year. In 2018 alone, merchandise sales reached $20 million. The show's cultural footprint had become economic in a way that the Adult Swim model had never quite achieved before. As of July 2026, the show has aired 87 episodes across 9 seasons, with Season 9 currently airing and the show renewed through Season 12. The feature film, directed by Jacob Hare, is in development at Warner Brothers. The animation budget, depending on which source you trust, runs anywhere from roughly $500,000 to over $1.5 million per episode. Each episode takes upward of a year to produce. By any metric, this is one of the most resource-intensive and commercially successful animated shows Adult Swim has ever produced. Now we go deeper into the iceberg, to the parts that most casual viewers either do not know or have heard of without knowing the details. Let us start at the very beginning, which is stranger than the show itself sometimes acknowledges. Rick and Morty exists because of a cease and desist letter from Bill Cosby's lawyers. That is not a metaphor. That is the chain of events. In 2004, Justin Roiland began submitting short films to Channel 101, a monthly non-profit short film festival in Los Angeles, co-founded by Dan Harmon. Channel 101 worked on a democratic system. The audience voted on which shows returned each month and which ones were canceled. Roiland got good at making things the audience wanted to watch. In January of 2005, he launched a series called House of Cosbys, in which a man cloned Bill Cosby using a machine, and the clones had increasing superpowers corresponding to their ordinal number. Clone 4 could play any instrument perfectly. Clone 6 could fly. Clone 8 gave people wisdom. It was absurdist and funny, and the Channel 101 audience loved it. It became the top-rated show on the site for 3 consecutive months. In June of 2005, Bill Cosby's lawyers sent Roiland and Harmon a cease and desist letter calling the show deeply offensive. House of Cosbys was canceled. And here is where the story becomes genuinely interesting. Roiland's response was not to back down. It was to create something deliberately, strategically more offensive, something he knew would be impossible to legally challenge without the claimant looking worse than the work they were complaining about. In October of 2006, Roiland created The Real Animated Adventures of Doc and Marty. The short was a crude, deliberately juvenile parody of Back to the Future, in which a character resembling Doc Brown forced his grandson to perform a sex act on him. The character names were Doc Smith and Marty McDonald's. The full working title of the short was a deliberately unwieldy phrase designed to reference Back to the Future just clearly enough to taunt Universal Pictures without being legally actionable. Roiland has been very clear that the short was designed as a protest, as a piece of provocation calibrated to make anyone who wanted to legally challenge it look worse for the challenge than Roiland would look for making it. But something happened during the editing process. Roiland became attached to the voices. The blustering, stammering, slightly drunk older scientist and the nervous, eager younger sidekick. They had a dynamic that felt alive to him in a way he had not anticipated from a protest cartoon. He kept working with the characters, and the protest started becoming something with its own momentum. When Adult Swim approached Dan Harmon in 2012 to produce an animated series, Harmon immediately brought in Roiland and suggested building something from the Doc and Marty characters. The names were changed. Doc Smith became Rick Sanchez. Marty McDonald's became Morty Smith. The dynamic remained. Rick's voice is, at its root, Justin Roiland's improvised version of Doc Brown from Back to the Future, filtered through the kinds of adult animation Roiland had been absorbing for years, pushed in a more sardonic, self-destructive, emotionally complex direction. The stammer, the belching, the oscillation between genuine tenderness and total contempt, that all came from Roiland in the recording booth, building on a character voice he had been developing since 2006. By the time the show premiered, the character had been alive in Roiland's voice for 7 years. And Dan Harmon brought his own history to the table. Harmon had created and run Community on NBC, a comedy about a community college study group that became one of the most beloved cult television shows of the 2010s. He was famously removed from the show after the 3rd season, a departure that came after public conflicts with the network and with at least one cast member about the direction of the show. Season 4 of Community was made without him, and the result is widely considered inferior, a fact that actually supports Harmon's position in the conflict. He was brought back for Season 5. He has said that Rick and Morty was conceived, at least in part, as his safety net in case Community ended permanently without him. A show he controlled, under his own banner, where no network could remove him from his own creation. The particular quality of Rick and Morty's creative ambition, the refusal to compromise on dark or uncomfortable content, the willingness to commit to story consequences that a broadcast network comedy would never permit, makes a lot more sense knowing where Harmon came from. The moment Rick and Morty stopped being a comedy that happened to have dark edges and started being something more serious in its intent came in Season 1, Episode 6. The episode is called Rick Potion Number 9. It was written by Justin Roiland, and it does something that no major animated sitcom had done before it. The premise is familiar enough. Morty asks Rick for a love potion to win over his crush Jessica at a school dance. Rick creates one, Morty uses it, and almost immediately things go wrong. Jessica has a flu, and the potion reacts with the virus and spreads to everyone at the school, making the entire student body obsessively attracted to Morty. Rick creates an antidote, but it reacts with a different flu mutation and the infection spreads outward, and within the episode, the entire human population of Earth has been mutated into grotesque hybrid creatures. The mutations are named Cronenbergs in the episode, after the body horror filmmaker David Cronenberg, and the word suits them. They are unsettling in a way that the show's animation style makes somehow worse rather than better. Here is where the episode does the thing that matters. Rick cannot fix it. He fails. He runs every option, and the Earth stays Cronenberged. So instead, he finds a parallel dimension where an alternate Rick and Morty solved the problem, but then died in an unrelated accident shortly afterward. He and Morty travel to that dimension, bury their alternate selves in the backyard, and simply take over those lives. The episode ends with Morty and Rick standing in a backyard in the dark, next to two fresh graves, having just become the people who live here now. Morty has a breakdown. He takes Summer out to the backyard and shows her the graves and tells her the truth, that this is not their original home, that the version of them who lived here is dead, that Rick has done this before and will probably do it again, and that the only way to survive it is to accept it and keep moving. It is one of the most nakedly devastating scenes the show has ever produced, made more devastating by how young Morty is and how clearly he has internalized his helplessness. The post-credits scene in the ruined dimension shows Beth and Jerry sitting quietly together, and they both admit they feel somehow better with Rick and Morty gone. It is a throwaway joke that lands like a gut punch when you think about it. The version of the Smith family that was destroyed is actually, by at least one measure, doing fine. The permanent consequence is what mattered most. The show committed. The old Earth was not restored. The family does not go back to their original home. From this episode onward, the Rick and Morty we follow are not actually in their original dimension, and the show refuses to smooth that over or make it irrelevant. That willingness to commit to what it costs, to let the premise have actual stakes, is what separated Rick and Morty from almost everything else on television at the time. Several episodes later, in the second season, the show did something else that almost no animated program has attempted. Season 2, Episode 3, is called Autoerotic Assimilation, and it spends most of its running time as a broad comedy about a hive-mind alien named Unity, voiced by Christina Hendricks, who turns out to be Rick's ex. Unity is a collective consciousness that takes over populations of other beings, and Rick and Unity's reunion is played partly for absurdist comedy and partly as a genuine portrait of two people who are terrible for each other in specific, recognizable ways. Unity eventually leaves Rick in a letter. She explains that Rick makes her worse, that his presence causes her to indulge impulses she cannot sustain, that loving him has made her something she does not want to be. It is a real breakup, written with real feeling, inside an episode about a hive-mind alien, which is exactly the kind of emotional sleight of hand the show does better than almost anyone. But then comes the ending. Rick returns to his garage alone. He begins assembling what appears to be a device of some kind. He moves quietly, methodically, with none of his usual manic energy. He goes to a small cage where he keeps a creature, a deformed, screaming animal that has clearly been there for some time. He speaks to it very softly and then vaporizes it, which looks on first viewing like casual cruelty, but reads differently once you understand what comes next. He sits down at his workbench, the device pointed at himself, and he leans forward as it powers up. He passes out. His head drops before the device finishes its cycle. And that is the scene. Rick Sanchez, the most powerful and intelligent being in his universe, attempting to end his own life in his garage while drunk and unconscious, failing not because of any intervention, but because he drank himself into a stupor first. The scene has no dialogue. It is about 40 seconds of pure animation and Ryan Elder's score, and it is the darkest thing the show has ever done. There is no joke, there is no reversal, there are no consequences in the very next scene. The show simply shows you what Rick is actually like when he is alone, and the performance stops, and then it moves on. This is the moment that most clearly established that the show was not just using Rick's nihilism as a comedic resource. It believed that Rick genuinely suffers. It took his pain seriously enough to show it in its rawest form without commentary. I think this scene is why so many people feel that Rick and Morty is not just a cartoon. It earns that. There is an episode in the first season that most people remember primarily for a single image, and what actually happened in it is darker than the image suggests. Season 1, Episode 5, is called Me Seeks and Destroy, and it contains two plots. One involves Rick creating a race of creatures called Mr. Meeseeks, blue beings whose entire existence is oriented toward completing a single assigned task, after which they cease to exist. The Meeseeks subplot is genuinely funny and became one of the show's most recognizable creations. The other plot involves Morty leading an adventure of his own through a fantasy world to prove to Rick that he can handle it. And on the way, Morty and Rick stop at a tavern and Morty goes to the bathroom, and in the bathroom he is cornered by King Jellybean, a massive, powerful authority figure in this fantasy world who sexually assaults him. The scene is played straight. There is no comedic softening. The predatory behavior is rendered in real time, and then Morty fights back and escapes, and he does not tell anyone what happened. Justin Roiland has confirmed that the scene was written and directed to be exactly as disturbing as it feels. The intent was for it to read as realistic and gritty, not as a cartoon joke about an uncomfortable situation. The standard practice requirements for the show apparently pushed back on the initial version of the storyboard, finding it too graphic, and Roiland insisted on a version that was grounded enough to actually land. It lands. The episode ends with Rick quietly shooting King Jellybean dead as the group leaves the fantasy world, even as the population of that world is mourning their king and hailing him as a hero. Rick does it without drawing attention to himself. He does not explain it to Morty. The implication is that Rick knew what had happened in that bathroom and chose not to intervene in time to stop it, because he calculated that Morty's sense of accomplishment in escaping on his own was worth more than the rescue. Whether that is a form of care or a form of cruelty, or some awful combination of both, is a question the show deliberately leaves open. 2 seasons into the show, the writers were already encoding continuity clues that most viewers would not fully decode until episodes or seasons later. Season 2, Episode 4, Total Recall, is the clearest example of this kind of layered construction. The premise of Total Recall is that a parasite has infected the Smith house, and the parasite reproduces by implanting false memories in its hosts, spawning new parasite characters with elaborate backstories that the family genuinely believes are real. The house fills up with increasingly bizarre characters that everyone is convinced have always been part of their lives. The key plot point is that the parasites can only create positive memories. They cannot manufacture bad ones. So if you have a bad memory involving a character, that character must be real. There is a moment early in the episode that works as a continuity Easter egg if you have seen episode 2 of the same season. Mortonite Run shows Rick picking up a handful of rocks that have small pink blobs on them. At the start of Total Recall, those same pink blobs have multiplied dramatically on those same rocks. If you caught that detail, you knew what was about to happen before the family did. The parasites arrived with the rocks. The show laid the clue in a preceding episode and then paid it off without ever drawing attention to the connection. And then there is the Mr. Poopy Butthole question. Mr. Poopy Butthole appears in Total Recall as one of the characters whose reality is in question. Is he a person or a parasite? The episode plants the answer earlier than most viewers notice. When Rick is trying to use bad memories to identify real people, Mr. Poopy Butthole appears in the montage of bad memories alongside the confirmed real family members. Because the parasites cannot create bad memories, his presence in that montage establishes him as real. Beth eventually shoots him anyway. He is not a parasite. He bleeds. He goes to the hospital. The family has to live with what they did to someone who was genuinely part of their lives. Mr. Poopy Butthole becomes a recurring character after this, which is wonderful and slightly surreal, and the show periodically checks back in with his life in ways that suggest the writers genuinely like him. He is, in the context of Rick and Morty, oddly wholesome. Now we go further down. The stories that built across entire seasons, the long games, the payoffs that took years. Evil Morty is arguably the most carefully constructed long-term plot in Rick and Morty's history, and the first appearance is so well disguised that most viewers did not realize what they were watching. Season 1, Episode 10, is called Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. The episode involves the Citadel of Ricks, the headquarters of the Council of Ricks, a governing body of Ricks from across the multiverse who coordinate their activities and share portal technology. The Council accuses Rick C-137 of killing several Ricks and capturing their Mortys, and the episode unfolds as a mystery about who is actually responsible. The answer, revealed in the final minutes, is a Rick who has been controlled by an eye patch transmitter worn by his Morty. At the climax, the Morty removes the eye patch, revealing that he has been puppeteering his Rick all along, and then he blends seamlessly into a crowd of ordinary Mortys and disappears. Most viewers registered this as a clever twist and moved on. The writers had other plans. Evil Morty disappeared for what felt like years in real broadcast time, reappearing in a single shot during Season 3, Episode 1, The Rick Shank Redemption, when he is seen being elected president of the Citadel in a shot that lasts only a moment and is easy to miss entirely. He runs the Citadel in the background of several subsequent episodes without ever being the focus. The show is slowly building something. The full picture does not arrive until the Season 5 finale, a two-part episode culminating in the episode called Rick Morty Jack. Evil Morty destroys the Citadel and breaches the central finite curve, and in doing so reveals what he has actually been after all along. He had discovered the central finite curve, the fact that all of Rick and Morty space is a bounded subset of the multiverse, walled off by Rick technology to ensure that Rick is always the smartest being in every universe within it. The curve is not a natural feature of reality. It was built by Ricks, deliberately, to guarantee their own dominance. And Morty's, by the logic of the curve, exist primarily as cloaking devices for Ricks, useful for their specific brainwave signature, replaceable, interchangeable, never the protagonist of their own story. Evil Morty found this out, and he decided he would not accept it. His campaign for the Citadel presidency, his management of Citadel politics, his manipulation of Rick C-137 in the original Season 1 episode, all of it was in service of one goal: building a machine to blast through the curve and escape to the actual unlimited multiverse beyond it, where Mortys are not manufactured sidekicks and Ricks do not have structural dominance over the shape of reality itself. The factory under the Citadel, powered by Rick and Morty DNA combined with portal fluid, was his means of doing it. At the end of the Season 5 finale, he succeeds. He goes through. The curve ruptures. The Citadel is destroyed. Evil Morty, who is not evil in any recognizable moral sense, who simply refused to accept the role he was assigned, escapes to a multiverse that Rick cannot follow him into. He comes back briefly in Season 7, Episode 5. He helps Rick C-137 kill Rick Prime, a piece of coordination that is complicated and clearly calculated. He deletes Rick Prime's backup clones beforehand, making the kill permanent. He downloads the schematics for something called the Omega device, and then he leaves again, back to the multiverse beyond the curve, with plans that the show has not yet fully revealed. The Omega device is hanging there, waiting. What makes Evil Morty work, and what makes him genuinely interesting rather than just a clever twist, is the legitimacy of his grievance. He is not wrong. Ricks did build the curve. Mortys are used as accessories. The show acknowledges this fully and does not undermine it. It is Rick's universe as much as any character in the show has ever said, except that it means exactly that, and Evil Morty was the first Morty to object. I think about him a lot. He is the most philosophically coherent character the show has produced. The central finite curve needs its own moment of explanation, because it reframes everything that came before it in the series once you understand what it is. The multiverse in Rick and Morty contains infinite universes. This should mean infinite variety, infinite possibility, no fixed hierarchies or guaranteed outcomes. But within the central finite curve, that is not true. The curve is a technological boundary built by the Ricks using portal technology, enclosing a specific subset of dimensions where one rule always holds. Rick is always the smartest being alive. Every universe inside the curve was selected or modified to guarantee Rick's intellectual supremacy. Everything the show has ever shown us, all 9 seasons of adventures across infinite dimensions, took place within this bounded, curated space. The real multiverse is bigger, stranger, and completely outside Rick's experience. The show signals the distinction through color in the Season 5 finale. Rick's portal gun generates an orange-yellow portal fluid. Evil Morty's machine, fueled by Rick and Morty DNA plus portal technology he reverse-engineered, generates a different color of portal, a cooler yellow. The color difference is the visual cue that he is not just going somewhere new, he is going somewhere fundamentally different in kind. The curve also retroactively explains the Citadel of Ricks. The Citadel was built beneath the curve's mechanisms, using its infrastructure. The Rick that originally built it which the show implies is Rick Prime rather than Rick C-137, was not just organizing Ricks for mutual benefit. He was centralizing control of the very technology that guaranteed Rick's dominance across dimensions. The Citadel is, in this reading, both a consequence and a reinforcement of the Curve's logic. Rick's consolidating power within a multiverse they had already rigged in their own favor. What Season 6 and 7 begin to explore is what happens to Rick C-137 when the Curve is gone. He cannot follow evil Morty into the true multiverse. His portal gun stopped working in the Season 6 premiere when the effects of the breached Curve finally reached him, and even after portal travel was restored, his access to the infinite multiverse beyond the Curve remained cut off. He is a Rick trapped in the bounded space that other Ricks built, while the Morty who figured out what that space was is somewhere outside it, free. Rick C-137 is unusual among Ricks, and understanding why requires understanding what happened to him before the show began. Most Ricks developed portal travel through natural intellectual curiosity, the same way scientists across the multiverse developed their various technologies, driven by problem-solving, by ambition, by the desire to understand. Rick C-137 developed portal travel for a different reason. Before he invented portal technology, Rick C-137 lived in Dimension C-137 with his wife Diane and his daughter Beth. He was a scientist, presumably brilliant, but not the interdimensional explorer he would become. Then another Rick visited him. This Rick, who the show eventually designates as Rick Prime, offered to share portal gun technology. Rick C-137 refused. He was not interested. He was content. He had a family he loved, and the offer came with implications he did not trust. Rick Prime retaliated. He sent a bomb through a portal into Rick C-137's garage and killed Diane and Beth. And then he left, not as a calculated move in some ongoing conflict, but as the casual cruelty of someone who finds people who refuse his gifts offensive. Rick Prime killed Rick C-137's entire world because he was turned down. Rick C-137, destroyed, obsessed, driven by grief in a direction most people never go, eventually invented his own portal gun from scratch. He is the only Rick in the multiverse known to have independently replicated portal technology, other than Rick Prime himself. Every other Rick either received the technology as a gift or acquired it through other means. The distinction matters. Rick C-137's genius was always exceptional, but his mastery of portal travel came not from intellectual joy, but from the grinding, terrible focus of someone who lost everything and needed to find the man who took it. The arc from Season 1 through Season 7 is, in this reading, a revenge story told across more than a decade of broadcasting. Rick C-137 uses his family as cover, as motivation, as the thing that keeps him functional enough to pursue his goal. He uses Morty because Morty's brainwaves mask his own, and because Rick, despite everything, cannot stop caring about the people around him. He dismantles the Galactic Federation and the Citadel and half the multiverse as a side effect of living his life while waiting for his chance. And in Season 7, Episode 5, the episode called Unmortrican, he gets it. Rick Prime is killed in Unmortrican in the most violent sequence the show has produced. Rick C-137 beats him to death, which is, after everything, a profoundly unsatisfying conclusion by design. Rick Prime does not reveal some hidden depth or acknowledge any regret. He dies as carelessly as he lived. And Rick C-137, having accomplished the thing that gave his life shape for decades, is left holding a conclusion that solves nothing about what it cost. And there is a detail about Rick C-137 that the show handled with considerable delicacy. The Beth who lives in his house, who calls him Dad, who he has grown close to over 9 seasons of adventures, is not his Beth. His Beth died in C-137 with Diane. The Beth in the current show is from a different dimension, a Beth whose own father is presumably somewhere else or dead. Rick C-137 is, in a very precise way, living a surrogate version of the family he lost, which explains almost everything about how he behaves in that family. The protectiveness, the difficulty, the moments of genuine tenderness followed by withdrawal, all of it becomes clearer when you understand that he knows she is not his daughter and he loves her anyway, which might be the most quietly devastating thing in the entire show. Season 3, Episode 9, The ABCs of Beth, contained a decision that the show has never officially resolved and apparently never plans to. Rick reveals that he can build Beth a clone of herself, accurate enough to fool everyone, that would take over her ordinary life while the real Beth goes off to explore the universe. Beth, after considerable anguish, agrees. Rick builds the clone. He puts both Beths into sleep pods, and then, very deliberately, he shuffles the pods so that neither he nor anyone else knows which Beth is which. They wake up, and one goes off to become Space Beth, and one stays home, and the show does not tell you which is which. Space Beth becomes a recurring character from Season 4 onward, complicated and interesting in her own right, and the question of which Beth is real becomes genuinely unanswerable. Dan Harmon has confirmed that the ambiguity is intentional and permanent, that the show will not resolve it. As of Season 9, which is currently airing, it remains open. The argument for why this works is more interesting than the question itself. The show is saying something about identity here that goes beyond a plot mystery. If Rick knows, he has hidden the knowledge from himself. If he cannot tell them apart, that suggests the clone is perfect enough that biological origin is functionally irrelevant to who Beth is. And if the show never resolves it, then both Beths are equally real for the purposes of the story, which means the concept of the real Beth has become meaningless. Harmon has said, in so many words, that the point is that it does not matter. Both of them are Beth, and Rick loves both of them, which may be the most he is capable of saying about how he feels about his daughter. Now we arrive at the event that changed the show's present tense, and the one that most of the audience has strong feelings about regardless of where they stand. On January 24, 2023, Adult Swim ended their association with Justin Roiland. The statement was brief. The reason given was that Roiland was facing domestic violence charges in Orange County, California. The following day, Hulu and 20th Television Animation also ended their relationships with Roiland, removing him from Solar Opposites, the show he co-created, and from Koala Man. Roiland had also resigned from Squanch Games, the studio behind the game High on Life, on January 16th, several days before the Adult Swim announcement. The domestic violence charges were dropped by the Orange County District Attorney in March of 2023. However, an NBC News investigation published in September of the same year alleged that Roiland had sexually assaulted one woman and had used his public profile to pursue young fans, including some who were reportedly underage. Roiland has disputed these allegations. No criminal charges from the NBC News investigation have been reported at the time of this writing. Roiland retains his co-creator credit on Rick and Morty and presumably retains an ongoing financial stake in the show's revenue as a result. But his operational and creative involvement ended with his firing. He has not been part of the production since. Season 7, which premiered on October 15, 2023, was the first season made entirely without Roiland. Ian Cardoni took over the voice of Rick. Harry Belden took over the voice of Morty. John Allen replaced Roiland as Mr. Poopy Butthole. The transition was handled without any in-universe acknowledgement. The show did not write an explanation for the voice change. Rick and Morty simply sound different from Season 7 onward, and the audience is expected to adjust. The response from the audience was, to put it plainly, mixed. Season 7's reception on aggregator sites was significantly lower than previous seasons, both in critical and audience ratings. Some of this was attributed to audience protest of the voice change, some to lingering controversy around Roiland himself, and some to genuine disagreements about the quality of the scripts. The new voice performances, and this is worth saying clearly, are technically proficient. Cardoni and Belden capture the characters without slavishly mimicking Roiland's specific delivery. Whether they are better or worse than the original is a question people will disagree about forever, and the answer depends significantly on how much of the character you locate in the voice itself versus the writing. Season 8, which aired in the summer of 2025, was received somewhat more warmly, and Season 9 is currently airing. Dan Harmon, now the sole showrunner in any meaningful creative sense, has described the post-Roiland era as an opportunity. He has framed it as a chance to more fully develop the characters' emotional lives, to pursue the show's most ambitious long-term arcs, and to push into territory that two showrunners with different creative instincts sometimes prevented. Whether that proves true across the remaining seasons will be the judgment history makes. Let us go deeper still, into the parts of the show that live in the margins, that reward the viewers who are paying the closest attention. The Gravity Falls Easter egg is one of the cleanest examples of deliberate cross-show world-building in modern American animation, and it almost slips past you if you are not watching for it. Gravity Falls, the Disney Channel animated series created by Alex Hirsch, ran from 2012 to 2016 and was one of the most enthusiastically mystery-coded shows in animation during that period. Alex Hirsch and Justin Roiland had a friendship and mutual creative respect. Both were working in animation. Both were interested in blending comedy with genuine mystery and emotional depth. And both were, apparently, the kind of people who like to confuse and delight their audiences with hidden details. In the Gravity Falls episode called Bottomless Pit, a number of objects belonging to Stan Pines, the gruff uncle at the center of that show, get sucked into a portal. Specifically, a question mark mug, a pen, and a notepad. In Rick and Morty's Season 1, Episode 10, Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, when Rick opens a series of portals, those same objects, the mug, the pen, and the notepad, come shooting out. Alex Hirsch confirmed publicly that the Easter egg was intentional and coordinated. He and Roiland had, in his words, started putting little Easter eggs in their shows that sort of connected the two. Hirsch noted their stated goal was primarily to freak people out and blow their minds. This is the kind of creative collaboration between showrunners that is easy in theory and rarely actually executed, because it requires both parties to be paying attention to each other's work at exactly the right moment. They were. The broader question of whether Gravity Falls and Rick and Morty exist in some kind of shared or adjacent multiverse is one fans have discussed at considerable length. The shows have very different tones and settings, but the Easter egg establishes at minimum that the production teams saw them as capable of occupying the same narrative space, if only briefly. It is a small thing, but it is the kind of small thing that makes paying attention feel rewarding. The Microverse Battery episode, Season 2, Episode 6, The Ricks Must Be Crazy, is the show at its philosophical sharpest, and it does something that most science fiction only hints at. Rick's car runs on a battery that is, in fact, a self-contained universe Rick created. The civilizations living within that universe believe they are generating their own power through a device Rick told them about, called the Google Box, but the power they generate actually flows outward to Rick's battery. They are, without knowing it, slaves to Rick's convenience. Rick has no particular guilt about this. It is a practical solution to a power problem. During the episode, Rick and Morty shrink down into the microverse to address a problem and discover that a scientist within that universe, Zeep Zanflorp, has independently developed his own miniverse battery. Zeep has enslaved a civilization within his miniverse for the same reason Rick enslaved his. The recursion continues. A scientist within the miniverse is developing a teeniverse, an entire nested chain of exploitation, each layer unaware that its liberating technology is itself being exploited by the layer above. The moral logic here is genuinely uncomfortable. Rick cannot call out Zeep's exploitation without calling out his own. The episode does not let him off the hook, exactly, but it also does not resolve the contradiction with any kind of corrective action. At the end, Rick destroys the miniverse and the teeniverse to reassert his own control, which means he eliminates competing exploitations to preserve his own. The civilizations inside those universes, which include people living actual lives, are destroyed because their existence threatened Rick's power source. The show narrates this without flinching, which is either brave or deeply cynical, depending on how charitably you read the intent. The report that this episode may have inspired Elon Musk in some fashion appeared in an article from the publication Inverse and has been cited numerous times since. The precise nature of the inspiration and whether Musk made this claim directly about the episode has not been conclusively verified in the research for this video, so treat that as unconfirmed. What is confirmed is that the nested exploitation concept has become one of the most discussed philosophical ideas the show introduced, and it is discussed in contexts well beyond animation fandom. Goodbye Moon Men is one of the most musically interesting things Rick and Morty has produced, and almost nobody talks about how it was made. Season 2, Episode 2, Morty Night Run, introduces a gaseous cloud-like alien named Fart, who communicates through song. The song is Goodbye Moon Men, and it is performed by Jermaine Clement, one of the two members of Flight of the Conchords, the New Zealand comedy folk duo, and also known from What We Do in the Shadows and various other comedy and dramatic roles. The song is beautiful. It is a genuine piece of music that could exist independently of the show. It earned its place in a number of year-end music lists in 2015. Composer Ryan Elder was handed the lyrics and asked to create a David Bowie-inspired song. He spent several hours listening to Bowie and then composed the music in a couple of hours on guitar. The result, as has been noted by several music rearists online, uses chord progressions and a key structure that some fans hear as strikingly close to Claude Debussy's Clair de Lune. This parallel is fan and music rearist observation rather than something Elder has confirmed as intentional, so it may be coincidence or unconscious influence rather than design. But whether intentional or not, the musical proximity to Debussy is a large part of why the song feels so melancholy and expansive. Debussy's harmonic language carries a particular emotional quality, a floating quality, something between longing and peace, and Goodbye Moon Men lands in exactly that register. The animation accompanying the song is widely considered an homage to the work of Gerald Scarfe, the political cartoonist and animator who designed the visuals for Pink Floyd's The Wall in 1982. Scarfe's animation style features extremely fluid organic forms, biology rendered as architecture and architecture rendered as biology, which suits the gaseous, shifting nature of Fart as a character and the dreaming quality of the song's content. It is among the most beautiful 2-minute sequences in the show's run. Season 3, Episode 8, Morty's Mind Blowers, contains a moment that is easy to miss on first viewing and very satisfying when you find it. The episode is structured as a cabinet of Rick's suppressed memories about Morty, a hidden collection of experiences that were too painful or too damaging for Morty to carry. One of these memories involves the truth tortoise, a creature whose gaze reveals absolute truth, a truth so terrible that Rick had to erase it from Morty's mind immediately. The truth tortoise communicates something to Morty in the vision, and the sound it makes in this sequence is deliberately obscured. If you run the audio backward, the message the tortoise delivers is, "I am a beetle, Paul is dead." This is a reference to the Paul is dead conspiracy theory that circulated in the late 1960s and particularly in 1969, which held that Paul McCartney had died in a car accident in 1966 and been secretly replaced by a look-alike named William Campbell, with the Beatles encoding clues to the death in their album artwork and recordings. The theory was, of course, wrong. Paul McCartney is alive, but the theory became one of the most persistent and detailed pieces of popular cultural mythology in music history, and the show used it as the content of an unspeakable cosmic truth. What makes the backwards message work in context is its utter absurdity. The truth tortoise reveals something so terrible that Rick had to wipe Morty's memory, and the thing it reveals is a decades-old Paul McCartney conspiracy theory. Whether this is a comment on the nature of conspiracy theories, a piece of absurdism, a commentary on Morty's specific vulnerabilities, or simply a joke that rewards attentive viewers is left entirely to the individual watching it. The voice delivering the backwards message appears to be Roiland's, obscured, which adds a slightly uncanny layer to it. The time freeze theory is one of the most widely discussed fan hypotheses in Rick and Morty, and it exists in an interesting liminal space between fan speculation and something very close to confirmed. The theory holds that Rick has been manipulating time or dimensional conditions to prevent Morty from aging, because Morty's specific youthful brainwave signature is what allows Rick to move through Citadel detection systems without being identified. Mortys are used as cloaking devices by Ricks across the multiverse. The value of that camouflage depends on Morty remaining young, which suggests Rick has a practical incentive to keep Morty from growing up, regardless of how he feels about the boy personally. Morty has been 14 years old across all 9 seasons of the show. The in-universe timeline, even accounting for the show's non-linear narrative and various timeline jumps, does not account for this if time is passing normally. Summer and Beth seem to exist in something closer to real time in some respects, but Morty is perpetually 14. The theory found something close to confirmation in the Rick and Morty 10th Anniversary Special comic, a non-canonical work in which Rick retires and, in doing so, apparently releases his grip on some temporal mechanism and the family visibly begins aging. Rick then reasserts control and declares, approximately, infinity years, Rick and Morty. The comic is not canonical to the show's main continuity, but it is clearly authored with inside knowledge of the show's themes and was produced with official involvement. Whether the writers consider this a real feature of the show's universe or a meta-joke about the show's production is, like so much in Rick and Morty, deliberately ambiguous. But as a reading of why Morty never ages, it is coherent, and it adds a layer to Rick's protectiveness that shifts it from parental affection to something more complicated. The interdimensional cable episodes deserve their own entry because they represent something genuinely unusual in how television comedy is made. Ricksty Minutes, Season 1, Episode 8, and Interdimensional Cable 2, Tempting Fate, Season 2, Episode 8, are largely improvised. The format is simple. Rick taps into interdimensional cable, and the group watches television from parallel universes. Each cable channel is a short piece of original content, a sketch, a parody, a strange advertisement, a fragment of an alien talk show. Justin Roiland generated most of this content in recording sessions that lasted 4 to 5 hours, trading improv pitches with writers in the room, building on whatever worked. Roiland has noted that he actually drinks during these sessions, which explains a certain quality of loose, escalating commitment in the more unhinged segments. The audio is then handed to storyboard artists, who Roiland either directs closely or gives significant free rein depending on the segment. The visual design of each cable show, its characters, its aesthetic, its world, all of it has to be created from scratch for content that may be 30 seconds long. This makes these episodes, paradoxically, among the most expensive to produce on a per-word basis, even though most of the dialogue was improvised in a recording booth. The amount of unique design work required for even a short interdimensional cable segment is significant. The result is a quality of comedy that does not feel like anything else in the show's catalog. The cable segments have a particular rhythm, a sense of not quite knowing where they are going, that is usually a weakness in scripted comedy, but works here because the content is framed as alien television, which is supposed to feel odd and discontinuous. The improv becomes a structural feature rather than a compromise, and some of the bits, the various Roy, a life well lived variations, the alien who keeps dying, the bits that became fan-favorite recurring references, have the specific energy of something genuinely discovered in the moment rather than written toward. Roy, a Life Well Lived is a VR life simulator game seen at the Alien Arcade Blips and Chits in Mortonite Run, and it deserves more attention than it usually gets as a piece of storytelling. The game works as follows. The player inhabits a man named Roy through his entire life from birth to death. Time in the simulation is heavily dilated, meaning a full human lifespan takes roughly 15 minutes of real time to play. The entire arc of a human life, childhood, early adulthood, family, career, decline, death, is available in the time it takes to watch a short film. Rick plays and beats the game by successfully completing carpet store management and maintaining relationships, dying of old age in a well-lived life. This is both funny and, if you think about it at all, melancholy. The game is real in a limited sense. The 2017 virtual reality game Rick and Morty, Virtual Rickality, developed by Owlchemy Labs, contains a version of it renamed Troy, A Life Lived. Playing it in VR gives you a slightly different relationship to the premise, because the physical immersion of VR makes the simulation of an entire life feel differently weighted than it does on a flat screen. This is a minor production detail, but it is the kind of detail that shows how thoroughly the intellectual property was being developed in parallel with the show's broadcast run. The Vat of Acid episode is Season 4, Episode 8, written by Jeff Loveness and Albro Lundy, directed by Jacob Hare, and it won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program in 2020. It is also the episode with the most personal production story in the show's history. The premise involves Rick creating a vat of fake acid for Morty to hide in during dangerous situations, and Morty, dismissing the usefulness of the device, eventually forcing Rick to create a save point remote that allows Morty to reset to a fixed point in time if his choices go badly. Morty uses the remote to live recklessly, taking physical risks, making choices with consequences he can reverse, and eventually, he falls in love with a girl he meets through a series of spontaneous decisions he could not have planned for, and they spend what appears to be a year or more together, a full life within the episode, until an accidental death of the girl forces him to reset. But the twist is not a reset. Rick reveals that the device does not reset timelines. It teleports Morty to a parallel dimension where things are identical, except that Morty made a different choice at the save point, and kills the Morty already living there so the jumping Morty can take his place. Every time Morty reset, he killed a version of himself and destroyed a parallel life to escape his own consequences. The full weight of what Morty has done across the episode, all the lives taken, all the dimensions casually destroyed, lands in a single extended horror sequence. The girl Morty falls in love with during the episode was written into the script as a result of a personal story. Director Jacob Hare's real-life fiancée, later his wife, Carrie Armelino, voiced the character. The love story section, according to production accounts, was not in the original script. Hare brought it in. The result is one of the most emotionally honest sequences in the show. A love story that lives and dies in a single episode, told with enough care that you feel the loss when it goes. Bird Person is Rick's oldest friend, and the relationship between them carries more weight than the show sometimes lets you see directly. Bird Person, a humanoid with large red wings and a deliberate, formal manner of speaking, fought alongside Rick against the Galactic Federation in a conflict the show references repeatedly but has never fully dramatized. Their friendship predates the events of the show by a significant period of time and is built on a shared history of genuine danger and genuine loss. Rick's love for Bird Person is one of the few places where his real feelings are visible without irony or deflection. The Season 2 finale, The Wedding Squanchers, is Bird Person's wedding to a woman named Tammy, a human who had been a student at Morty and Summer's school in an earlier episode. The wedding is held on an alien planet, with Rick's entire inner circle in attendance. And then, during the ceremony, Tammy reveals herself as a deep-cover Galactic Federation agent. She has been in a relationship with Bird Person, specifically to orchestrate this moment, gathering all of Rick's most important connections in one place for simultaneous capture or elimination. She shoots Bird Person multiple times at the altar. Tammy had been a recurring minor character for most of Season 2. The reveal that she was an undercover agent the entire time, that every moment she shared with Bird Person and with Summer was calculated, retroactively reframes everything we saw her do. This is the long con executed in the show's own continuity. A character played as background flavor turning out to have been the architecture of a trap built across an entire season. Bird Person survives, barely, and is subsequently resurrected by the Federation as a cyborg-designated Phoenix Person, a creature with Bird Person's body and an overwritten personality serving the Federation's interests. He is eventually recovered and restored, but the restoration is not complete in the way it sounds. Bird Person came back, but what was done to him cannot be entirely undone, and the show treats this with the seriousness it deserves. Now we go to the bottom of the iceberg. The details that most viewers, even dedicated ones, have never fully absorbed. Aberdolf Linkler is a character from the Season 1 finale, Rick's Business, who represents everything Rick and Morty does with a throwaway concept. He commits to the joke so completely that it becomes something else. Rick created Aberdolf Linkler by combining the DNA of Abraham Lincoln and Adolf Hitler, intending to produce a morally neutral superleader, someone with the charisma and authority of both historical figures, but without the extreme moral valences of either. The result is a man who is simultaneously driven to liberate the enslaved and to enslave others, who delivers speeches about equality while fighting genocidal impulses, who is cognitively and emotionally paralyzed by the contradiction of his own nature. He is genuinely tragic in a way that the setup does not entirely prepare you for. He is a man whose suffering was designed into him by someone who thought the concept was funny and did not think through what it would be like to live inside it. Aberdolf Linkler is voiced by Maurice LaMarche, who has voiced an enormous range of animated characters over several decades. At the end of Rick's business, Aberdolf Linkler is apparently dead, consumed in a battle with testicle monsters. In a post-credits moment, he wakes among the creatures, saying the word revenge, before the scene cuts. He is not mentioned again. His revenge is pending, somewhere in the infinite multiverse, and the show has never returned to him. This is either an oversight or one of the show's many deliberately dangling threads. I genuinely cannot tell which, and I find that appropriate. Gazorp Azorpfield is everything Season 1's interdimensional cable sequence does with the most knowing kind of parody. The Gazorpians were introduced in a different Season 1 episode as an aggressively hypermasculine alien species, and their interdimensional cable programming, glimpsed briefly, includes a strip of content hosted by Gazorp Azorpfield, who is exactly what the name suggests. A Gazorpian version of Garfield, the American newspaper comic strip cat known for hating Mondays and loving lasagna. Gazorp Azorpfield is deeply, genuinely threatening toward his owner John, verbally abusive in a way that goes considerably beyond anything in the original strip. He likes enchiladas rather than lasagna, and the show embeds a very specific joke. Rick notes that Gazorp Azorpfield is voiced, in this dimension, by Gazorp Azorp's version of Lorenzo Music. Lorenzo Music was the actor who voiced Garfield in the original Garfield and Friends animated series until his death in 2001. In the movies, the Garfield character was voiced by Bill Murray. The joke in the Rick and Morty dialogue is therefore a very precise and somewhat melancholy observation about the difference between what something is and what it becomes when it is adapted for a different medium by a different performer. Most viewers catch that it is funny without quite catching exactly what is being said. The precision of it is, I think, a bit underappreciated. Krombopoulos Michael is a Gromflemite assassin and Rick's self-described best customer, and he appears only briefly in Mortonite Run before being killed by accident, and the brief time he occupies the screen is extraordinarily well used. He is a professional killer with a cheerful disposition. He finds deep joy in his work. He gives Morty his business card with genuine warmth. His catchphrase, delivered with complete sincerity, is some variation of, "Oh boy, here I go killing again." He is described as buying weapons from Rick because he does not like the government telling him he cannot kill people, which is framed not as ideological extremism, but as the kind of mild consumer complaint you might make about a parking restriction. He dies because Morty, piloting Rick's ship for the first time, panics and crashes it into the field where Krombopoulos Michael is waiting for a target. The death is accidental, instantaneous, and the episode's entire second half is driven by the consequences of that accident. What is remarkable about Krombopoulos Michael as a character is how fully realized he is in about 3 minutes of screen time. He has a voice, a worldview, a relationship with Rick, and a self-consistency that makes him feel like a supporting character from a show you have already been watching for years. He also has the distinction of being the reason that one of the most beloved fan sayings from the show, the enthusiastic declaration of his catchphrase, became a piece of internet language that escaped its original context entirely. The show's scientific foundations are worth addressing because they reveal something about how the writers think, even when the science is wrong. Rick and Morty's multiverse is grounded in the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, the framework developed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957, which proposes that every quantum event that could go multiple ways does go multiple ways, each in a branching parallel universe. This is a real scientific hypothesis, taken seriously by a significant portion of theoretical physicists, and the show uses it as its foundational premise. The infinite multiverse is not magic or metaphor in Rick and Morty. It is the logical consequence of quantum mechanics, taken to its largest possible scale. The show also engages with simulation theory, with the Dyson sphere concept as a model for civilization-scale energy use, and with cosmological ideas about the scale and structure of the universe. The writers have researched and sometimes consulted scientists. Slate ran an article in 2017 noting that the show's handling of multiverse theory is scientifically incorrect in various specific ways, but also noting that physicists generally do not mind because the concepts are being used to tell interesting stories about identity, consequence, and the nature of choice, rather than to teach physics. The show is inspired by real frameworks without being bound by them. The Microverse Battery episode in particular has been noted as philosophically resonant with certain real arguments about the nature of consciousness, exploitation, and nested systems. Whether any of this constitutes good science education is beside the point. The show treats science as interesting rather than as decoration, and that attitude produces a different kind of storytelling than the average animated comedy. The show's awards history reflects a quality that was recognized before the broader cultural conversation caught up with it. Rick and Morty won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program twice, first in 2018 for Pickle Rick, written by Jessica Gao and directed by Anthony Chun, and then in 2020 for the Vat of Acid episode, directed by Jacob Hare. In 2018, the show also won 4 Annie Awards for Season 3, including awards for writing, voice acting, storyboarding, and character animation. It won the Critics' Choice Award for Best Animated Series in 2018. In 2017, 2019, and 2021, Rick and Morty was the #1 comedy across all United States cable television. The Season 3 finale drew a 3.9 rating in the adults 18 to 24 demographic, which was the highest rating in Adult Swim history at that time. These numbers matter for context. Rick and Morty is not just a cult success, not just a prestige animation darling for a dedicated audience. It is a mass-market phenomenon that also happens to be engaged with by serious critics, which is a combination that most television manages to achieve in one direction or the other, but rarely both simultaneously. The financial numbers support this reading. Over $1 billion in revenue since the premiere, more than 150 global licensees, merchandise sales reaching $20 million in 2018 alone. The Scary Terry episode, Season 1's second episode, Lawnmower Dog, is the show's clearest early homage to film history, and it earns the comparison rather than just trading on it. The episode parodies both Inception, the Christopher Nolan film from 2010, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, the 1984 Wes Craven horror film. The main plot involves Rick and Morty entering the dream of Morty's teacher to manipulate him into giving Morty better grades, diving multiple dreams deep in a structure that is explicitly Inception-shaped, using the film's logic of nested dream levels even as it parodies them. The horror element is Scary Terry, a Freddy Krueger rearrog who appears as a dream monster, complete with bladed gloves and a burnt, distorted appearance. The twist the show adds is crucial to why it works, rather than just being a reference. In this show's dream logic, dying in someone else's dream kills you for real. For Scary Terry, however, killing people in dreams merely wakes them up. His entire purpose, his entire threat, is inverted. He is a nightmare monster who cannot actually hurt anyone, which turns out to produce a very specific kind of pathos. The episode eventually spends time in Scary Terry's own dream, revealing his anxieties and vulnerabilities, and Rick and Morty help him resolve his own nightmare, which Scary Terry finds deeply moving. He becomes their ally. The inversion of Freddy Krueger's threat into something the show can sympathize with is, in miniature, the technique the show uses with Rick himself. Take the most frightening exterior and find something recognizably human inside it. The title of the Season 5 finale is a reference to Samurai Jack, the Cartoon Network animated series created by Genndy Tartakovsky, and the reference goes further than just the title. Rick Samurai Jack, the Season 5 finale, follows Rick over a 50-year period in which he has exiled himself from his family and is living alone with 2 crows, a sequence that mirrors the structure of Samurai Jack's final season, in which Jack has spent 50 years in the future without aging, alone, estranged from his original world and purpose. Adult Swim released special crossover art created by Genndy Tartakovsky himself to celebrate the episode's premiere, confirming the connection as intentional rather than coincidental. The episode's on-screen title card is not Rick Morty Jack. The title card shown during the episode reads, Rick and Two Crows, Chapter 13, A Wing and a Prayer, styled as if it were a chapter of a longer narrative, which is itself a reference to Samurai Jack's serialized chapter titling structure. The dual titling reflects something the show does occasionally with its marketing and its actual content, presenting different faces to different audiences, with the casual viewer seeing one title and the attentive viewer finding another. The Rick and Morty anime, officially titled Rick and Morty, the Anime, represents the most significant expansion of the franchise outside its original form. Announced in May of 2022 and ordered by Adult Swim, the series was created and directed by Takashi Sano and produced by Sola Entertainment, with animation by Telecom Animation. 10 episodes were produced. The English dub premiered on Adult Swim on August 15, 2024, with a Japanese subtitled version also available. The series is set in the period between Season 5 and Season 6 of the main show, specifically during the time when the portal guns were disabled and Rick and Morty were separated and returned to their original dimensions. The anime features alternate universe members of the Smith family and is not specifically following Rick C-137 as its central subject. Sano has described it as a standalone original work that adapts the themes and emotional textures of the main series while telling its own story. The production design is recognizably Rick and Morty in its character shapes and color palette, but rendered in a distinctly different animation style, with more fluid motion and a different approach to visual storytelling than the Bardell Entertainment House style that defined the first 8 seasons. The anime's existence reflects a pattern of expansion that the show has pursued across multiple media. Beyond the main series, there are comic book series published through Oni Press, video games including the now-defunct Pocket Morty's mobile game, VR experiences, and the upcoming feature film. The Pocket Morty's shutdown is a small piece of recent franchise history that is easy to miss but worth noting. Pocket Morty's launched in January of 2016 as a free-to-play mobile game developed by Adult Swim Games. The format was essentially a Pokemon-style creature-collecting game in which you captured and trained different Mortys from across the multiverse, using them in turn-based battles. It ran for exactly 10 years. On the game's 10th anniversary, January 13, 2026, the shutdown was announced. The servers went offline on April 13, 2026, less than 3 months before this video was made. 10 years is a long life for a mobile game of this type. The shutdown was not due to any scandal or technical failure, but simply to the economics of maintaining an aging mobile game in a market that moves very quickly. The game is gone now, and the 10 years of Morty collecting progress that players accumulated went with it. For a certain kind of Rick and Morty fan, the generation that grew up playing it on their phones starting in 2016, its disappearance is a minor but real loss. Season 8 and Season 9 represent the show in a post-Rick Prime era, and understanding what Dan Harmon said about Season 8's theme helps clarify what the show is trying to do now. Harmon described Season 8 as being about characters running out of people to blame. Rick can no longer locate his purpose in hunting Rick Prime, because Rick Prime is dead. He killed him in Season 7, and the killing resolved nothing that needed resolving. Morty can no longer claim that Rick forces him into adventures, because the show has accumulated too much evidence that Morty goes willingly, and sometimes eagerly. Beth can no longer believe her problems with her father are simply his fault. The theme is accountability without the relief of a clear enemy to point at. Season 8's episode titles give a sense of the directions this took. Summer of All Fears, Valkyric, The Rick the Mort and the Ugly, The Last Temptation of Jerry, and Hot Rick among them. The presence of a Jerry-focused episode in that list is notable because Jerry's character has often been treated as comedy fodder without the emotional complexity afforded to the other family members. A Jerry episode that takes his temptation seriously is exactly the kind of move the Season 8 theme implies. Season 9 is currently airing as of the time of this writing. with its first episode having premiered on May 24, 2026. What it will mean for the show's long-term direction remains to be seen. The renewal through season 12 means at least 3 more seasons after the current one, and the confirmed feature film represents the franchise's first serious move toward theatrical format. Jacob Hare, who directed some of the show's most celebrated episodes including the Vat of Acid episode and Unmortrican, will direct the film. The format, theatrical versus streaming, has not been officially confirmed. Dan Harmon confirmed the film's development ahead of Season 9's premiere. It will take several years to produce. The show, at more than 12 years old, is in an unusual position. It has survived a major cast change. It has outlasted the public relationship of its 2 co-creators, one of whom is no longer involved. It has won industry awards, generated $1 billion in revenue, provoked genuine cultural debate, and produced some of the most emotionally precise moments in animation. It has also, at various points, had some of the worst-behaved fans of any animated show in history. It contains all of these things simultaneously, and it keeps going. What I find most interesting about where Rick and Morty stands right now, and this is a genuine opinion rather than a summary, is that the show's most ambitious narrative has already been told. The Rick C-137 story, from the death of Diane to the killing of Rick Prime, is structurally complete. Evil Morty is somewhere in the limitless multiverse with the Omega device and plans we do not yet know. The Beth clone question remains open. The show has, in a sense, burned its own mythology down to the ground and is now standing in the clearing, deciding what to build next. That is either an opportunity or a danger, depending on whether the writers can locate a new source of emotional weight to replace the one they spent 7 seasons building toward. Season 8 and Season 9 are the first real test of that. The show's engagement with superhero culture, and specifically with Marvel and DC, is something that surfaces most directly in Season 3, Episode 4, Vindicators 3, The Return of Worldender, and it is sharper than it first appears. The Vindicators are a team of costumed hero types who have called on Rick and Morty twice before the episode begins, for 2 adventures that happened off-screen. The episode opens on the 3rd call, which Rick resents because he and Morty were not invited for the 2nd adventure. The team is assembled on a space station to face a villain called Worldender. What follows is, on the surface, a Saw-style trap scenario in which a drunk Rick has apparently set up elaborate death puzzles for the Vindicators before passing out in the corner, unable to remember doing any of it. But what makes the episode work is how precisely each Vindicator maps onto a specific superhero archetype and then subverts it. Vance Maximus is the team's most obvious Iron Man Rearog. He is charismatic, wealthy, celebrated, and a functioning alcoholic whose alcoholism is treated as part of his appeal rather than as a problem. The episode draws a direct line between the Tony Stark archetype's romanticism of drinking and the actual human damage that alcoholism causes. Vance is not a satirical exaggeration. He is a fairly accurate description of how certain superhero narratives handle substance abuse, dressed up in comic colors. Million Ants is a being made entirely of ants with a human consciousness at its center, which maps most directly onto Ant-Man, though with some elements that suggest the Marvel villain Swarm, a Nazi war criminal whose mind survives as a cloud of bees. The character's physical impossibility, a human personality distributed across millions of separate insects, is used to explore questions of identity and continuity that the more traditional superhero versions of similar characters rarely have to address. What does it mean to be yourself when any of your component parts can be destroyed and replaced? Crocubot is a half-crocodile, half-robot hybrid, which the show frames as a direct riff on DC's Cyborg, though pushed further into the absurd. Doomnometron's name ends in the suffix typical of robot villain names from the Ultron lineage, referencing Age of Ultron and the broader Marvel tradition of robotic antagonists. The Vindicators logo is a version of the Avengers A, with crosshairs overlaid on it, which captures something true about the superhero genre's relationship with weaponry and violence, while presenting itself as heroism. The episode's thesis, if it has one, is that the heroes the culture celebrates and the heroes Rick despises are often the same thing. People who have decided their moral framework is sufficient to justify enormous collateral damage. Rick's contempt for the Vindicators is not entirely nihilism. Some of it is accurate diagnosis. The episode does not let Rick off the hook for being difficult and selfish, and sometimes simply wrong, but it does allow him the point that people who wear the costume of heroism often use it to avoid self-examination in exactly the way Dr. Wong describes Rick doing with his intelligence. Season 1, Episode 9, Something Ricked This Way Comes, contains one of the show's most consistently enjoyable guest performances, and the design work on the character is a piece of film history that rewards knowing about it. Lucius Needful is the devil. He arrives in the town and opens a curiosity shop, where everything for sale is enchanted and beautiful, but each item carries a curse. The standard Faustian bargain premise, executed with the show's usual commitment to taking the premise at face value and following it to absurd conclusions. Rick, being Rick, immediately perceives the scam and attempts to undercut Needful by scientifically neutralizing the curses on the items, eventually destroying the devil's business entirely through the ruthless application of rational rereasis. The devil is voiced by Alfred Molina, who at the time was perhaps most famous for playing Dr. Octopus in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. Molina brings enormous warmth and slight pathos to Needful, making him charming rather than genuinely sinister, which is exactly the register the episode needs. The Faustian devil works best as a salesman, and Molina is very good at playing charm with something uncomfortable underneath it. The visual design of Lucius Needful is based on Mr. Dark, the primary villain of the 1983 Disney film adaptation of Ray Bradbury's novel, Something Wicked This Way Comes. The episode title is itself a riff on Bradbury's title. Bradbury's Mr. Dark runs a carnival that grants desires at terrible cost, which is structurally identical to Needful's shop, and the character design carries over the specific visual vocabulary of the film's version. The dark suit, the precise manner, the slight aura of wrongness beneath the surface politeness. For viewers who know the Bradbury reference, the episode's title and design work as a piece of literary homage. For viewers who do not, the comedy stands entirely on its own. This is something the show does well across its run, layering references in a way that rewards knowledge without punishing ignorance. You can enjoy Lucius Needful without knowing who Mr. Dark is. You get something extra if you do. Get Swifty, Season 2, Episode 5, is the show's most direct engagement with performance culture and validation anxiety, dressed up as a story about alien heads demanding Earth produce a new song or be destroyed. The Cromulons are enormous floating alien heads that materialize above Earth and issue this demand in voices that carry the specific authority of game show hosts across the universe. Their program, called Planet Music, is an American Idol-style competition that spans civilizations, with losing planets simply being destroyed. Earth's population splits between those who join a religious cult worshipping the alien heads, believing they are gods to be appeased, and those trying to escape or fight. Rick and Morty go on the Cromulon planet to perform, and Rick performs Get Swifty, a song he improvises on stage with Morty, which the Cromulons accept. The song Get Swifty was performed by Justin Roiland in the role of Rick, and the recording process was apparently as improvised as it sounds. The Cromulons as a design are striking, enormous, floating, expressionless except for the quality of their judgment, which they deliver not with words but with a simple thumbs up or thumbs down and the word, simply, nice. The show uses the Planet Music premise to make a comment about the specific anxiety of performing for an audience whose standards you cannot know, whose satisfaction requires you to produce not just competence but spontaneous, novel creativity on demand, and whose disapproval is terminal. The parallel to the show itself, to any creative work produced for mass consumption and judged in real time by an enormous audience, is not difficult to find. The Cromulons are the internet rating system and the Nielsen box and the YouTube algorithm, given a single face and enormous gravitational weight. Rick wins by producing something immediately, instinctively, without overthinking it. The moral is either that creative intuition beats calculated performance, or that the Cromulons are simply pleased by confidence, or that there is no way to know what audiences want, and you might as well do what feels right. Possibly all three. The episode titles in Rick and Morty are not accidents, and spending time with them reveals something about how the writers think about the show's relationship to the broader culture of film, television, and literature. Mortonite Run, the Season 2 episode that introduces Krombopulos Michael and the Fart storyline, is a wordplay on Midnight Run, the 1988 comedy film about a bounty hunter and a bail jumper. The substitution of Morty for Midnight creates a character-specific title that also signals the episode's road movie structure. Two unwilling companions on a journey together, negotiating a relationship they did not choose. Rattlestar Rick Lactica, the Season 4 episode that involves a civilization of snakes and time travel complications, is a reference to Battlestar Galactica, the science fiction franchise that had its most critically acclaimed form in the reimagined series that aired from 2003 to 2009. The substitution is purely comedic, but the episode's interest in the bootstrap paradox of time travel, how a civilization's entire history can be bootstrapped into existence by a future version of itself, has a seriousness of science fiction intent that the Battlestar Galactica comparison partly earns. Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, Season 1's 10th episode introducing Evil Morty, is a play on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Steven Spielberg's 1977 science fiction film about first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. The Spielberg film is about humanity encountering something genuinely alien and responding with a mixture of awe and panic and obsession. Close Rick Counters uses the template but replaces the alien with Rick himself, who is, within the citadel of Rick's mythology, a kind of god figure who other Ricks have organized an entire civilization around. The Rick is the alien encounter, not the thing the Ricks are encountering. Something Rick This Way Comes is the Bradbury reference already discussed. Rick Mirai Jack carries the Samurai Jack parallel already noted. And then there is a subset of episode titles that are simply wordplay on Rick or Morty substituted into existing phrases. Solarix for Season 6's premiere, itself a wordplay on Solaris and Rick. The Curixus Case of Benjamin Button, a Season 8 title, substituting Rick into Curious and Beth into Benjamin for the Curious Case of Benjamin Button. These are the show's equivalent of background gags, the jokes that live in the margins for the viewers who are paying attention to the margins. Jessica's arc across the first 5 seasons of the show is one of the most patient and ultimately melancholy love stories in the show's history, and I think it does not get discussed enough on its own terms. From the very first episode, Morty's crush on Jessica is established as one of the driving emotional facts of his life. He is 14 and he likes a girl at school, and he cannot talk to her without catastrophe, and Rick sometimes enables his pursuit of her and sometimes weaponizes her importance to Morty for his own purposes, and the whole thing runs like a low hum beneath the larger adventures across 5 full seasons of television. That is a long time to sustain a crush in a comedy without resolving it. In Season 5, Episode 1, Mort Dinner Rick Andre, the episode essentially addresses the Jessica arc at its most operatic scale. A series of circumstances leads to Jessica being transported to a dimension where time runs at a dramatically different rate, and she spends what appears to be hundreds of years there, becoming, in the episode's terms, a time god, a being who has lived so long and seen so much that ordinary human temporal experience no longer applies to her. She comes back from those centuries of experience and she is kind to Morty. She is not cruel. She does not reject him harshly. She simply tells him that they should just be friends, with a gentleness that is somehow worse than cruelty because it is so complete and so sincere. After 5 seasons and hundreds of in-universe years from Jessica's perspective, Morty's crush ends not with a declaration of mutual feeling, not with heartbreak in the conventional sense, but with a quiet, gracious goodbye from someone who has become something far beyond what either of them were when it started. The show refuses to make this a triumphant moment for Morty, or a villainous one for Jessica. It is simply what happened. Time and experience, and the specific kinds of growing that Morty and Jessica did, separately produced 2 people who no longer fit the same story. That is, I think, an unusually honest thing for an animated comedy to say. The Rick and Morty vs. Dungeons & Dragons crossover comic, published between 2018 and 2019 by Oni Press and IDW Publishing, is one of the more surprising pieces of the franchise's extended universe, because it is actually very good, and because the creative team involved is not who you would necessarily expect. The series was written by Jim Zub and Patrick Rothfuss. Rothfuss is the author of The Name of the Wind, the first novel in the Kingkiller Chronicle fantasy series, one of the most anticipated and long-delayed book series in contemporary fantasy fiction. The choice of Rothfuss as co-writer for a Dungeons & Dragons crossover makes a certain kind of sense. His novels are deeply, lovingly engaged with fantasy tropes, with the specific pleasures and limitations of the hero narrative in a world with established rules of magic and power. He understands what makes those tropes compelling and what makes them worth subverting. The art was provided by Troy Little, and the series ran across 4 issues of the first volume before a sequel, subtitled Chapter 2, Painscape, was published from September through December of 2019. The first series was collected in a deluxe hardcover edition that was nominated for the Eisner Award for Best Graphic Album in 2022. The Eisner is the most prestigious award in American comics publishing. The nomination reflects a critical reception that went beyond the franchise crossover novelty. The series is self-aware about what it is doing in a way that suits both source properties. Rick and Morty's approach to established narrative conventions is to treat them with cheerful contempt while secretly taking them seriously. Dungeons & Dragons as a cultural institution is, in a sense, the ur-text of collaborative world-building and fantasy adventure, the thing from which enormous portions of contemporary genre entertainment descend. Putting Rick into that context, giving Morty a legitimate arena in which his kindness and intuition, rather than Rick's intelligence, might be the relevant skill set, produces interesting friction. The sales reflected the interest. The first series sold nearly 21,000 copies, which was described as a surprise hit for IDW. The voice work behind the show, and especially the range of guest voices the show has attracted, tells you something about the cultural position Rick and Morty occupied at its peak. Susan Sarandon, playing Dr. Wong in Pickle Rick, is the obvious example because it produced the most famous speech in the series. But the full list across the show's run reveals a pattern. Christina Hendricks, fresh from Mad Men and one of the most recognizable actors in prestige television at the time, played Unity in Season 2's Autoerotic Assimilation, giving one of the most unsettling and melancholy performances in the show with only her voice. The decision to cast the person culturally associated with a very specific kind of emotionally complicated, desired but not understood femininity in the role of a being who literally absorbs and controls other people's consciousness is, read with enough attention, a very deliberate piece of casting. Alfred Molina playing Lucius Needful, as already discussed, brought the specific authority of his Dr. Octopus performance to a very different kind of villain. Jermaine Clement as Fart brought the musical intelligence and particular deadpan warmth of Flight of the Conchords to a character who exists only to sing one song and then die. The match between Clement's gifts and what the role required is so precise that it is hard to imagine the song working with any other performer. Maurice LaMarche, who voiced Aberdolf Linkler, has one of the most distinguished careers in animation voice work in American history. He is perhaps best known as the voice of Brain in Pinky and the Brain and for his imitations of Orson Welles, but his range across animation is enormous, and his willingness to commit fully to even a minor character like Linkler reflects a professionalism that shows up on screen. John Hamm's casting for the Cromulon heads, which multiple sources attribute to him, but which was not definitively confirmed in the research for this video, would fit the pattern if accurate. The most prestigious dramatic leading man of the Mad Men era giving his voice to a floating alien game show head. That would be exactly the kind of casting the show enjoys. The core cast has remained remarkably stable across the show's run, despite the Roiland departure. Sarah Chalke, Spencer Grammer, Chris Parnell, and the recurring cast members have maintained their performances without interruption, and the consistency of the family dynamic in the voice performances is a significant part of why the show survived the transition in the two leads. Season 6 of Rick and Morty begins with one of the most dramatically interesting premises the show has attempted, and the episode that kicks it off, Solarix, is worth examining on its own. The Season 5 finale ends with evil Morty breaching the central finite curve. The effect of this breach is immediate and widespread. all portal guns stop working. The portal gun technology was linked to the curve's infrastructure, and with the curve breached, the portal system is broken. Rick and Morty find themselves back in their original dimensions, separated, unable to reach each other or anyone else who depends on portal travel. For Rick C-137, this means returning to dimension C-137, where his wife Diane and his daughter Beth died, where there is nothing left of the life he had before. For the Morty currently living in Rick's garage, this means returning to his original dimension, which turns out to have a different and significantly worse version of Rick in it. The premise forces both characters to confront their origins directly, which neither of them wants to do. Rick's grief over Diane and Beth is not resolved or processed. It is just there, as it always has been, and the episode forces him to stand in it without the usual machinery of adventure and purpose to distract him. The Season 6 premiere also introduces a specific detail about Rick Prime that becomes significant for the rest of the season and into Season 7. Rick Prime is not Rick C-137's Rick. He is another Rick entirely, the one who built the Curve and the Citadel, the one who killed Diane and Beth to punish Rick C-137 for refusing his gift. He appears in the Season 6 premiere in a way that makes clear he is the real long-term antagonist of the show, and that everything Rick C-137 has done across 6 seasons has been, at some level, preparation for eventually finding the man who destroyed his life. The portal gun repair arc, in which Rick must rebuild portal travel from scratch without the Curve's infrastructure, runs through parts of Season 6 and reflects something true about what the show is exploring in this period. What does Rick actually know how to do when he cannot rely on tools that other Ricks built for him? The answer, which is that he is still extraordinarily capable but also more vulnerable and more exposed, gives Season 6 a texture that is different from the earlier seasons, more personal and less pyrotechnic. Rick's mental health is something the show has addressed not through diagnosis, but through behavior, and the accumulated portrait across 9 seasons is complex enough to warrant its own consideration. The show has never officially diagnosed Rick. There is no episode in which a character sits Rick down and names what is wrong with him in clinical language, but the behaviors are documented in full. Alcoholism that is severe enough to affect his physical functioning and his decision-making, depression that produces at least one documented suicide attempt, a narcissistic presentation that the show is careful to distinguish from narcissistic personality disorder by showing how much of it is constructed rather than inherent, and post-traumatic stress patterns that manifest across dozens of episodes in his responses to intimacy, to connection, and to loss. What the show does with Rick's alcoholism specifically is unusual for an animated comedy. Rick's drinking is not portrayed as quirky or endearing in any sustained way. It is a disease that affects his family. It is one of the reasons Beth grew up with a certain kind of damage. It is part of the pattern of behavior that Dr. Wong diagnoses in Pickle Rick, the mechanism by which Rick avoids sitting still long enough for his own pain to reach him. When Rick is most drunk, he is most dangerous, not physically but emotionally. The scenes where Rick is truly intoxicated are usually the scenes where he is most likely to do something that will cost someone close to him something real. The suicide attempt in autoerotic assimilation is never referenced again in any explicit way. It does not become part of a conversation. Rick does not get treatment. The family does not know it happened. The show just shows it and allows you to carry the knowledge of it forward into every subsequent scene where Rick is alone and not performing. That restraint is, I think, the right creative choice. The scene says everything it needs to say. To then build a recovery arc around it would turn it into a plot point when what it actually is a window. Rick's relationship with Morty operates partly as a substitute for the family he lost, and partly as the one context in which Rick is willing to genuinely invest in someone else's growth rather than just his own genius. The investment is uneven, and sometimes terrible, and sometimes genuinely moving, but it is real. Morty is the person Rick would die for, in a show full of death and resurrection and alternate selves that make death cheap. When Rick risks his life specifically for Morty, as distinct from the countless times he risks it for adventure or ambition, the weight of the gesture is different, and the show usually finds the way to let you feel the difference. Multiple fan re-rises and a few cultural commentaries have attempted clinical frameworks for Rick, proposing PTSD, bipolar disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder as possibilities, alongside the more obvious alcoholism and depression. None of these can be definitively applied without the show itself making the argument, and the show is smart enough not to reduce a character as large as Rick to a list of diagnoses. What can be said is that Rick Sanchez is a portrait of a brilliant person who is genuinely and seriously mentally ill, for whom the illness is part of how the brilliance functions, and for whom the question of whether genius is worth the cost of everything it destroys is one the show refuses to answer tidily. The show's relationship to religion and to governing authority is worth a moment on its own, because it is more coherent than the episodic format sometimes makes it appear. Rick is a consistent and committed atheist, and the show treats his atheism not as a quirk, but as a position arrived at through direct evidence. Rick has encountered gods in the show's universe. He has met beings who claim divine status or are worshipped as divine. In several cases, he has defeated them. This is not the atheism of someone who simply cannot be bothered to believe. It is the atheism of someone who has seen enough of the universe at sufficient scale to form an informed opinion, and whose opinion is that divinity, as a concept, does not hold. The show's relationship with government and with institutional authority follows a similar logic. The Galactic Federation is the primary face of cosmic authority in the show's universe, and it is portrayed as bureaucratic, exploitative, and self-interested in exactly the way that institutional authority tends to be. Rick's contempt for it is consistent with his contempt for all institutions, but in this case the contempt is also, within the show's terms, correct. The Federation does enslave civilizations. It does operate primarily as a mechanism for maintaining the power of whoever is at its top. Rick dismantling it in the Season 3 premiere is played as triumphant rather than nihilistic, because the Federation is genuinely bad, not merely inconvenient. The Citadel of Ricks is a more complicated institutional object. It is bad in ways the show makes clear, particularly in the election arc that gives us Evil Morty as Citadel president, which portrays the Citadel's political structure as capable of being won by a sufficiently clever operator regardless of the good it might do the people inside. But the Citadel is also, from certain angles, a mutual aid organization. Ricks helping Ricks, sharing technology and protecting each other. The problem, as Evil Morty identifies, is that this protection is built on the subjugation of Mortys, and that any civilization built on someone else's subjugation is not a civilization, but a hierarchy with decorative elements. The show's political imagination, in this reading, is fairly consistent. Every institution is ultimately a mechanism for the consolidation and preservation of some form of power, and the question is always who the power is consolidated against. Rick understands this and uses it, and occasionally dismantles it, and is not thereby innocent of benefiting from it. That is a more sophisticated political position than most animated comedies attempt. The production process for Rick and Morty is, by any standard, enormously resource-intensive, and the specifics help explain both the quality and the irregular release schedule that has frustrated fans repeatedly. Each episode takes upward of a year to produce. This is not unusual for animation, which is inherently labor-intensive, but it is on the longer end even within that context. The budget per episode is reported variously between roughly $500,000 and over $1.5 million, depending on which source and which component of production is being measured. The higher figure likely reflects total production costs including music, voice recording, and all post-production work. The animation was produced by Bardell Entertainment in Vancouver, Canada, through the first 8 seasons, a studio that has worked on a significant range of animated productions for major networks. The writing process is separate from and precedes the animation by a significant lead time. Scripts are written, revised, approved, storyboarded, and then handed to the animation pipeline, which begins the lengthy process of building and moving the actual frames. Changes late in the process are expensive in a way that television comedy almost never experiences, because unlike live-action television, where a director can call for another take, any change to the animation after a certain point requires rebuilding entire scenes from scratch. The improvised nature of certain content, particularly the interdimensional cable segments, adds a different kind of expense. The improv audio comes first, the visuals follow, and because the visuals cannot be reused or adapted from existing character and set designs, every sketch requires original creation. An interdimensional cable episode that contains 20 different channel parodies contains 20 different complete visual worlds that were designed, built, and animated for sequences that might each be 30 seconds long. The production load is wildly disproportionate to the runtime of each segment. This is part of why the show's release schedules have been erratic. Season 4 was split into 2 halves, airing months apart. Season 3's April Fool's premiere was followed by a 4-month gap before the remaining episodes. The year-plus wait between seasons that fans have repeatedly experienced is not primarily creative indecision. It is the physics of producing a show at this quality level, with this budget and this production method. The fact that the show has continued producing at high quality while navigating a major cast change and shifting showrunner dynamics makes the production team's work, which is largely invisible to the viewing audience, considerably more impressive on reflection. The post-credit sequences in Rick and Morty are a creative space the show uses with more intention than is usually credited, and they reward the habit of not turning off the episode at the apparent ending. The post-credits scene in Rick Potion number 9, the Season 1 episode where Rick and Morty move to a replacement dimension and bury their alternate selves in the backyard, has already been discussed here, but it is worth dwelling on what it does structurally. Most post-credit scenes in animation are throwaway gags, brief jokes that add nothing to the episode's meaning. The Rick Potion number 9 post-credit scene reverses the episode's emotional temperature. You have just watched Morty suffer through one of the darkest moments in the show's history. And then the credits roll, and you come back to the ruined Cronenberg Earth, to the Beth and Jerry who were left behind. And they are sitting quietly together, and they both admit, carefully, that things feel better now, calmer, that the house is more peaceful. It is an incredibly uncomfortable observation, because it is probably true, and because the implication that Rick and Morty's presence in the household is a source of ongoing damage even when the adventures do not end in catastrophe, is something the show is making you hold without resolving it. The King Jellybean post-credits scene works similarly. The episode ends with Rick's silent execution of Jellybean. The credits roll, and then you are back in the fantasy world, where the local population has found their king dead and is mourning him as a hero, erecting statues, calling him a good ruler who protected his people, and Rick's single quiet act of justice is invisible to them. Jellybean is remembered as great. The boy he assaulted in a bathroom is not part of the story they tell. The post-credits scene does not comment on this. It simply shows it, which is worse than any commentary could be. The Mr. Poopy Butthole post-credits scenes across multiple episodes chart a life in miniature across the show's run. After being shot by Beth in Total Recall, he appears in subsequent post-credits moments in the hospital, then in rehabilitation, then teaching, then meeting a woman, then getting married, then having a child. By the time the show is well into its later seasons, Mr. Poopy Butthole has lived a full adult life in the margins of the show's credits. The cumulative effect, if you have been watching across all of those episodes, is quietly moving. Here is a life happening in the space between the story, visible only to viewers who stayed. Mr. Meeseeks is probably the most merchandisable character the show ever created, and the existential underpinning of the concept is darker than the blue toy figurine versions in every gift shop suggest. Mr. Meeseeks, introduced in Season 1, Episode 5, Meeseeks and Destroy, are beings who are summoned from a Meeseeks box and exist for a single purpose: to complete one assigned task, after which they cease to exist. They have no prior history, no future, no identity beyond the task. They appear cheerful about this. The concept is comedic and the execution is enormously funny. But the show makes a point that is easy to miss in the comedy. A Meeseeks that cannot complete its task does not cease to exist. It keeps existing. And existing, for a being with no purpose and no identity beyond a task it cannot fulfill, is agony. The Meeseeks in the episode that are assigned Jerry's golf problem cannot solve it, because Jerry is too incompetent to improve. and they multiply because each Meeseeks summons more Meeseeks to help, and the longer they exist, the more distressed they become, until the situation escalates into something requiring Rick and Morty's intervention. The premise of a being that experiences existence as suffering when it cannot complete its function is uncomfortable enough. What makes it more uncomfortable is the implication that purpose is not a privilege, but a survival mechanism. The Meeseeks that have purpose are fine. The ones that cannot fulfill their purpose are in constant pain. It is a comedic version of a very old philosophical argument about what makes life livable. If meaning is the only thing that makes existence tolerable, then beings without access to meaning, for whatever reason, are in a genuinely terrible situation. The show encodes this inside a blue rubber toy character who shouts variations on the phrase, "Mr. Meeseeks, look at me," and it works as comedy. And if you look at it for an extra moment, it also works as something worth thinking about. The show's cultural influence on animation and on adult comedy television more broadly is difficult to quantify, but worth sketching in outline, because it is real, and it has been significant. The success of Rick and Morty demonstrated, in a way that the network could cite with specific ratings numbers and specific revenue figures, that animated adult comedy could sustain a large cable audience with ambitious, serialized, emotionally complex storytelling. This was not a given before 2013. Adult Swim had successful programming, but nothing that had demonstrated Rick and Morty scale commercial and critical traction simultaneously. The show became a proof of concept that the market would support animation that took its own premises seriously and demanded something of its audience. In the years following Rick and Morty's rise, the adult animation landscape changed in ways that are at least partly attributable to what the show proved possible. Shows with serialized science fiction premises, with dense continuity and long-game storytelling, with emotional complexity layered under absurdist comedy, became more common across cable and streaming platforms. This is not to say Rick and Morty invented any of these things. It did not. Futurama had sophisticated serialized science fiction storytelling a decade earlier, but Rick and Morty demonstrated it to a new generation of viewers and network executives at a scale and with a cultural footprint that made the argument undeniable. The show also demonstrated something about the value of the specific combined skill set that Roiland and Harmon brought to it. The improvised energy of Roiland's performance and the structural discipline of Harmon's story circle technique, a method Harmon developed for Community and has discussed publicly at length, produced something that neither approach alone would have generated. Roiland's tendency toward the juvenilely extreme and the emotionally honest was disciplined by Harmon's insistence on character motivation and consequence. Harmon's tendency toward structural formalism was loosened by Roiland's willingness to let recording sessions go wherever they went. The specific creative friction between them is part of what made the show what it is, which makes the post-Roiland era a genuine creative experiment rather than simply a continuation. How that experiment resolves, whether Dan Harmon alone or Dan Harmon with a new creative team produces something comparably distinctive to the Roiland era work, remains to be answered across the remaining seasons and the eventual feature film. The show has been renewed through season 12. There is time to find out. Rick and Morty began as a protest against a cease and desist letter. It became an improvised internet short about deeply offensive characters. It became a pitch at a monthly short film festival. It became a conversation between two writers about what kind of animated show they could make without a network's permission to go somewhere real. And then it became, improbably and then very probably and then inescapably, one of the most talked about, argued about, and genuinely felt pieces of American animation of its era. The show asked a question from its very first episode and has been living inside it ever since. If there are infinite versions of every moment and every person, then what, if anything, actually matters? And the answer it kept arriving at, through 9 seasons of evidence, is this: the specific things you do to the specific people in front of you matter. Not because the multiverse enforces consequences, but because Morty's face when he buries his other self in the backyard is real. Because Rick passing out in his garage is real. Because Beth choosing to leave and Beth choosing to stay are both real choices made by a real person, whichever Beth is which. The show that started as a nihilism delivery mechanism kept arriving. again and again, at the conclusion that nihilism is a defense mechanism and not a philosophy, and that the people who love Rick and Morty for Rick's contempt for everything have missed the whole point. It is a show that cares deeply about the people it pretends not to care about, and that contradiction is its whole heart. If you made it this far, thank you. It was a long one. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.